right, welcome. Welcome to the Women for Kansas Virtual Chapter meeting. I'm Ty Edwards, and I'm going to be moderating today, introducing our host. And then I did want you to know that this exciting topic is probably going to lead you to have questions. So the Q&A feature should be working at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to submit questions anytime while we're going through, and then we will make sure we get to them once we get through our speaker. So let me do some introductions before we get too far into this. Again, I'm Ty Edwards. I am with the Women for Kansas Executive Committee, and we're so glad you're joining us on a day when the snow may melt in Kansas, which we are very excited to experience. We are an advocacy group that is statewide, and I wanted to show you here a little bit of our website. If you've never visited the Women for Kansas website, let me show it to you here on the screen. You can find us at womenforkansas.org, and we have updated our mission statement and our legislative priorities. Last year was our 10th anniversary, so we're doing some updating and excitement for that anniversary. So you can see there, the mission of Women for Kansas is to recruit, motivate, and educate women and all Kansans to actively participate in the process of electing moderates to public office who will advocate for moderate policies. And that's the basis of what we're going to talk about today. Another great few things to note while you're looking at the website is you can find the legislative hotline and how to find your legislator here on our website. We have our YouTube channel, which is linked here. This meeting, even that you're attending today, we're going to post this on YouTube after the event today, so you can watch it again or share it. There's election information, and then if you'd like to join our newsletter to hear about upcoming meetings like this one, or to learn about how to get to our YouTube channel or important Kansas news, these are ways you can access that. I also wanted to share with you our mission. We just read that, right? Our mission is to recruit, motivate, and educate women and all Kansans to actively participate in the process of electing moderates to public office who will advocate for moderate policies. What are those moderate policies? So our legislative priorities include a fair and progressive tax system that adequately funds public services, a court system free from political influence, equal rights for all, reproductive rights and bodily autonomy, separation of church and state, advocacy of healthcare as a human right, stronger laws to prevent gun violence, preservation of excellence in public schools and higher education, recognition of and support for the arts as vital to our quality of life, and protection of our environment and ecosystems against avoidable degradation. Our goal is to organize at the state level and to form chapters to collaborate, discuss, and advocate for enactment of our legislative priorities. So you're attending the virtual chapter. One of our goals with the virtual chapter was to give access to folks who may not live near a chapter that meets in person, and also to bring together people that could just perhaps be a little more convenient, right? I've been on many a webinar and Zoom meeting while I parent or do other things, so you can enjoy this while you are busy with your important things in your life. All right, so moving on to what we're talking about today. So our talk today, and the title has changed a little from the ad you've seen, is how and why to provide testimony related to pending legislation in the Kansas Legislature. So this is another way you can participate in our state democracy and have your voice heard on important issues. And the person speaking us today about this is Jamie Reaver. So Jamie has spent many years in advocacy work at the state and national level. She previously led the United Way of the Flint Hills, and today she is the executive director of Kansas Appleseed, which is part of a national network of 18 Appleseed centers. And she's going to share with us a little bit more about the work that they do. You can visit their website at www.kansasappleseed.org and find more information, read their research and reports, connect to their advocacy. I was reading one of their reports in prep for this meeting, and Jamie shared with me that they put out a report about every 6 weeks, just to show you the level of research and work they're doing on important issues in our state. But Jamie is here today because Jamie is a Women for Kansas Emporia chapter leader. So she is sharing her knowledge and expertise with us and with people around the state so we can learn to do effective advocacy at the Kansas legislative level. So Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you. She's going to have some slides and other things she shares with you. And again, post your questions in the Q&A as we go through. And at the end, we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Okay, Jamie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ty. Let me get set up and get my screen shared. and we can get started. Okay, here we go. So thanks so much for letting me speak today. Working on advocacy, especially in the Kansas State House, is one of my favorite things to do and one of my favorite things to promote. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of the knowledge I've gained after being in the State House for like the last 6 legislative sessions. It is some of the most exciting, some of the hardest, and some of the proudest work that I think we do at Kansas Appleseed, because we know that through our participation in the legislative process, by submitting testimony and doing so much other advocacy, we're able to make a difference in the state. So I'm going to start with just a quick overview of who we are at Kansas Appleseed. So here's our mission. We believe Kansans working together can build a state full of thriving, inclusive, and just communities. That's not an ambitious mission at all, but we're really proud of the work that we're able to do. And as you look at this
Really
mission,
quick,
I really—
Jamie. Hey, Jamie, we can't see your slides. You
Oh,
might
you
need to share them.
can't?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I can.
that's, let's see.
There we go. Now I do.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. So I
Yeah,
cannot
you might
see
want to
them
start
now.
start the presentation. We're seeing notes
Okay.
slide. Yeah.
Okay, so do you see the first slide or from the current slide?
There
How's
you
that?
go.
Now we're good?
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, so the 3 words that we really focus on are thriving, inclusive, and just. So I want to kind of just go into a little bit of detail about what that means for us at Kansas Appleseed. So under our thriving portfolio, we're doing everything we can to remove barriers to accessing food assistance programs. So we're trying to promote and protect programs like SNAP and child nutrition programs, which is where your school meals are. Under our inclusive campaign, we're working to increase civic engagement, because our research has shown us that communities that have greater civic engagement are healthier. They have access to better housing, better healthcare, better schools, more green spaces. And just a little spoiler alert, that's something that we're going to be releasing, a report we'll be releasing in early to mid-March, is just the impact of civic engagement in our communities. And then under our Just campaign, we're working to make sure every Kansan can benefit from fair and effective systems of justice. So we spend a lot of time working to reform the adult justice space, reforming the youth justice space, like ending fines and fees for kids, and improving the foster care system. So those are really ambitious goals, and you might be curious like how we do it. And for us, the most important thing for our organization is that we listen to Kansans. So our staff of 10 actually lives throughout the entire state. We have an office in Lawrence, but we actually our staff lives everywhere. For example, I live in Emporia. And then we have about 24 board members who also live throughout the entire state. So we don't want to be an organization that just focuses on one community. We want to make sure that we're listening and responding to Kansans everywhere in the state. And then after we've done listening and we talk to Kansans about the issues that they're facing, we start to do our research. Because we know that lived experience is so important, but we also need to back it up with data. And, sometimes the data shows us, more often than not, the data shows us that it's sometimes the issue is much worse than we ever could have imagined, especially when we're looking at things like, systemic racism in communities and how they impact the foster care system and hunger, access to the legal system. And so then, we take what we've heard on the ground, we take our research, and we really start our grassroots advocacy. And that's like working with Kansans and helping them build their power, use their voices, like in submitting testimony, to be able to seek change. And then we do grass tops advocacy, which is just the way, the work when we go to elected officials at whatever level of government. We've gone from school board members to members of Congress in our advocacy, because we're just really committed to talking to the right person at the right time to work on an issue for us. And then when we've done all of that, and I wish I could say that we're successful 100% of the time, if that doesn't work, then we do something called impact litigation. We have a legal director on our team, and if we feel like there's some issues that are unconstitutional, we will fight them in the courts. And so that's what we did to reform the foster care system, some voter suppression laws, as well as fighting an unconstitutional gang database in the city of Wichita. So kind of getting into the meat of the presentation, this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. All political power is inherent in the people. And I'm sure for many of you, this is something very familiar because it is from the Kansas Bill of Rights. And it really emphasizes the idea that political power comes from the people and is a fundamental principle of democracy. It means that the people of Kansas have the authority to create and change their government, and that the government is created to protect and benefit the people. So this really affirms our right and our responsibility to hold elected officials accountable to their constituents. And I think this is also really emphasizes why, the kind of the symbiotic nature of government, like we need them and they need us. So we really just need to start working together on more things to ensure that good laws are passed. This, I think, really just also emphasizes why you need to engage with legislators every chance you get, whether it's phone calls, emails, text messages, in-person presentations, meetings in person with your elected officials, whether it's in district or in the state house, and why you need to participate in the legislative process through testimony. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to give you a little overview of like the legislative calendar so you can kind of see where we are right now, because we are in the thick of it. We're going to talk about how a bill becomes a law in the state. And as much as I love the video that we all watched after school, in the 70s and 80s, it should be similar to that. And it's really dissimilar to that too in a lot of ways. And then also talking about when your testimony is needed. So here's what the legislative calendar looks like. So we had our first day of session on January 13th of this year. The Kansas Legislature has a 90-day session. And so January 13th, like start of the clock. So every day the legislature is in session, that counts as a day. So like weekends don't count unless they're in session. But you may have heard folks talk this year about how the session is going faster than usual. So I'm going to tell you why that is. So in past years, the Kansas Legislature was really only in session Monday through Thursday, maybe an occasional Friday. But this year, they are also meeting on Fridays. So that has created a very compressed timeline, a very compressed calendar. So everything is just moving so much faster than in past years. So, advocates and concerned citizens have to really be at our A game to stay on top of everything. So about the first like 45-ish days of session, that maybe a little bit less, that's the first part of session. Then we get to turn around, which is when bills must be passed out of their chamber of origin into the other chamber. And then the legislature reconvenes after turnaround, and they go for another like 6 weeks-ish into their second part of session, and that lasts until March 28th. After that, they send all of their bills over to the governor. The governor decides to sign them or veto them. And then at the end, the legislature will reconvene in about mid-April for a veto session, and at which time they will take up any of the bills the governor vetoed to determine if they're going to override them or not. And then in mid-April, when that's all said and done, that's what we call sine die. And that's a Latin phrase that means without a day. And it's used to describe when a meeting or session ends without setting a date to reconvene. So we have sine die. Everyone goes home unless a special session is called by the governor. So that's just a really quick overview of what the calendar looks like. If you're doing any kind of advocacy and you're paying attention, like these dates are really set in stone. And so we are constantly watching them, because the minute you miss a deadline as an advocate, you've really lost a lot of ability to make an impact on a law. The next slide is actually kind of one of my favorite things that I've seen in a while, and I can't take any credit from it. It actually is from our friends at Loudlight, and I know a lot of you might be fans of them as well. So this is something that you're pretty familiar with. So how a bill becomes a law in the state of Kansas is, pretty simple. Pretty simple, maybe. So the first part of session, what you will see in Kansas is that bills are introduced. And so if you look at the very top, like right up here, and they're at kind of a small print, I wish I could have gotten a little bit bigger. It really shows all the phases that a bill goes to become a law. And I really want to kind of emphasize, well, let me back up for a second. I I think why this is simple and not simple is that on paper, this looks great, but there are just so many things that can happen that disrupt this process. And it could be, through the amendment process. It could be using the gut and go process to insert language into a shell bill. Um, that's already made it through the process, but language gets stripped away to create a new law that no one really voted for. Or it could be, by a technique called blessing of bills. When a bill hasn't really hit the deadlines it's supposed to, the legislature or leadership could actually bless bills so that way they stay alive a lot longer. And so on this, you will see that, a bill is introduced, it goes into the committee process, and this is really what we're going to be talking about today. And when a bill is in committee process, it has a hearing, it has deliberations, and we call that when a bill is being worked, and then a committee can decide to approve a bill for passage to send to the floor. And then once it gets to the House floor or the Senate floor, they will vote on it. They'll deliberate it, they'll approve it or not approve it. They vote it for final passage, and then they send it over to the other chamber for them to vote on as well. And they kind of walk through the exact same process. Oh, I did not mean to go that far ahead. And the committee process is probably one of my favorite things in the legislature. We have nearly 50 standing committees in the legislature. That is a lot of committees to work through. And I think that's also what can make the process a little bit confusing, a little bit overwhelming to follow. But in some of my future slides, you're going to see how we can actually simplify it a lot, as long as you know exactly what you're looking for. So with those 50 standing committees, they are made up of legislators, and they have staff from the revisor's office who write the requested bills and legislative research as well. I love watching committees in action. It's fun to just see how everyone kind of sits at the table and really works through things. And I think that's when we actually have the opportunity to learn more about the thinking of our elected officials. So then I already mentioned that the second house receives a bill. And as you can see, it's right there in the middle of the page. Well, that's where we are right now in the session. We're at that spot called turnaround, where everything's been moved out of the first house. Now things are getting organized and they're moving over to the second house. So that's exactly where we are right now. When bills get to the second house, their work has already been whittled down pretty much. Bills that didn't make it to this point have already been thrown out. And then the second house will just start the whole process over again. So the committee meetings start up again. There's committee hearings where testimony can be allowed. They'll approve, they'll disapprove. And then so what happens is once the second house receives it, they've worked it through the committee process, they send it to their floor, and if they agree with everything from the first house, they'll approve it and they'll send it to the governor. If they make some tweaks to it and make some amendments, they send it back to the House of Origin to see if they'll concur. And if they don't concur, then they actually have to go into a conference committee, and then they send it back to both houses in order to for approval, and then they send it to the governor's desk. And then at that point, the governor has 10 days to sign a bill into law or to veto it. And so as you look at this, you can see right there where the sirens are, there's a big emphasis on testimony. And so we're going to talk about why you have the greatest opportunity to use your voice in this process. So what is testimony? Testimony is part of the legislative process that allows you to share views and information with lawmakers about proposed legislation. The biggest misnomer about providing testimony is that somehow you have to be a policy expert. And we at Kansas Appleseed believe deeply that your life experiences make you an expert. Lived experience is just as important as research to letting elected officials know what's actually going on in their communities throughout the state. And when you offer testimony, you can either give it in writing or verbally. So I really do believe that your testimony is your power. A lot of times, due to the fast nature of the legislative session, and I think some really complicated rules, we don't really hear about bills until they make their way to the floor for a final vote or to the governor's desk for her to sign a bill into law or to veto. And so that's when a lot of us will start taking action. We'll send emails, we'll make phone calls, we'll make some social media posts about it. And that kind of advocacy is really important because we have to make sure elected officials always know that we're paying attention and we know what's going on. But sometimes that advocacy at that stage might be a little bit too late. Our advocacy, especially on some bills that can bring some real harm to Kansans, our advocacy has to start the minute a bill is introduced. So testimony during the committee hearings is one of the best ways to do that. That's really the first test of any bill. Will it have the legs to make it to a final vote on the floor? Sometimes I'll hear from a friend, we'll be talking about something in the legislature and they'll say, did you see that one bill that was introduced? So I was so upset about it that I emailed my legislator and told him he better support or oppose it. And so it's really exciting to see, your friends and loved ones get involved in advocacy, but also sometimes they might be reaching out to the wrong person at the wrong time. Because someone's own legislator might not actually see a bill until it gets to the floor for final passage. And so that's why we have to be more involved in the committees and in the committee hearing so we can make sure that questions and concerns about a bill are getting addressed early on. And another reason why I really like the committee process, it's a time when elected officials have to hear from every single Kansan. So I'm sure, you've all reached out to your elected officials at one time or another to tell them how you feel about a bill. Sometimes I know that I've been so mad about a bill that I've called elected officials who weren't my representatives. I didn't live in their district. They lived in a different district, but I still wanted them to know how I felt about a bill. And the honest thing is that if someone's not in their district, an elected official isn't really going to pay attention to what that person has to say. I mean, I've heard it before. I mean, from elected officials that I respect and elected officials who I might not agree with, who will say, well, it doesn't really help when you reach out to me. I'm not going to pay attention to what you're saying because you're not my constituents. But testimony makes more legislators listen to you. Because when you offer testimony, you are at your most powerful. You're speaking or writing to around a dozen elected officials at one time. At that point, they are a collective body, not paying attention to district boundaries. So when you submit testimony, you're forcing more people to listen to you. You're forcing more people to think about an issue a little bit differently. So your voice is the most powerful when you're offering testimony. The biggest thing too, when you want to submit testimony is understanding the process. The most important thing is like once you find an issue that is really important to you, it's important to know what the bill number is. That is really your guide to everything. So if you know about an issue and you don't know the bill number, reach out to an advocacy organization that you're following who works on the topic. We have some really great advocacy organizations in Kansas, Kansas Appleseed, the ACLU of Kansas, KIFA, Kansas Action for Children, Loud Light. I mean, all of us produce newsletters. We all have really active Facebook and Twitter pages, so you can stay abreast on the issues. And if you don't have an organization that you're following, reach out to your legislator and just ask them, hey, there's a bill about X. Can you help me find the bill number? And then the legislature's website is an amazing tool that you should get to know well because it is your one-stop shop to everything that you could possibly need to know about a bill and how to submit testimony. And so I'm just going to make sure you have it right there. Maybe click on the link, copy and paste it, bookmark it, because if you want to be active in the State House, this is one of the most important places that you need to go. So we're going to kind of walk through the legislature website. I'm just doing it through a lot of screenshots. So I'm not going to be clicking through a lot of different websites. So let's say for today's presentation, we are all really interested in submitting testimony on SCR 1611. So let's get started. So here is the homepage of the Kansas Legislature website. And there's so many great things to see about this website. So for example, on the left side of the page, you can see where I've already typed in 1611 under find a bill. You can find your legislator. You can look up legislative deadlines. At the top, you'll also see everything that you need to know about who's in the Senate, who's in the House. I do want to point out the tab Bills and Laws, which is right across the top. And when you have a moment, click through it because it is actually a listing of every single bill that's been introduced this session. And it can actually make for fun reading, to be honest, sometimes frustrating reading, but it gives you a good sense of the depth of issues before our legislature. This is where I learned a few years ago that the waltz might become our official state dance. It's where I learned that the watermelon might become our state fruit. And it's where you can read about, issues related to education, what bills are being introduced to, improve education or take away some rights for education. You can learn, efforts to, get the Kansas City Chiefs moved over to the Kansas side. So it's actually some pretty fun reading. Maybe I'm just a policy nerd in some ways, but I really like looking at that stuff. But I also think this is a good place to look to see like how much legislators are working on and dealing with, because so much of their work is just really routine. We see the headlines on a lot of the big bills, but so much of the work of the legislature is routine. And I actually once heard someone in Senate leadership say that most of the work is actually in a bipartisan nature. More people support the bills that they're passing than not. It's just that, the ones that make the headlines are the ones that they have the most disagreement. And so I think for the most part, we can see a legislature that is, doing its job in a lot of ways. So as you can see, kind of going back to 1611, so I typed into find a bill 1611 because that's the bill number. And then I'm going to go to the next slide, click look up. And the next slide is going to take me to SCR 1611. So SCR 1611 is a proposed constitutional amendment to provide for direct election of Supreme Court justices and abolish the Supreme Court nominating commission. I chose this one because it's really timely as a hearing coming up. And also Kansas Appleseed actually got our start 25 years ago protecting the court. So this is something that we're really keeping our eye on. So on this page, you will get all you really need to know about a bill. You get a short title. If you look down at bill versions, you can see how the bill is introduced. A lot of times when bills go through a lot of amendments, all of those the documents portion will just keep filling up with all of the versions of the bill before it got to the final one that was signed into law. And then if you look down, you can see when a bill is introduced, what committee it was referred to, and when there's a committee hearing. So everything is updated daily. So this is a great resource to keep an eye on the bills. I always like looking to see who requested a bill for introduction. And if we could click on that link, it would show you. So just a really, really good, active, well-maintained website. And so when you look at this, you're seeing we have a hearing on Tuesday, February 25th at 10:30 a.m. in room 144S. And so if that's something that's of interest to you, you're thinking, okay, what do I need to just submit testimony? So what you're going to do is on that blue link, it says in the bottom of the page, Committee on Federal and State Affairs. You're going to click on that, and it's going to take you to the committee page so you can learn how to submit testimony. And so here you go. Here is the full page for the Senate. It has a lot of really important information on this page as well. So if this were a fully functioning web page that I was showing you, instead of just a screenshot, you would be able to see the names of the members. You could click on their names, you get their email addresses, where their office is, where they live. You can click the link so you can live stream their committee meetings, which I think is one of the best things that ever came out of COVID, because it invites so many more people into the legislative process. You can see past testimony. You can see the name of the committee assistant. And I will just say that committee assistants are some of the most amazing individuals in the State House. They work really hard every single day to keep the legislature organized. And so if you ever get to work with a committee assistant, just know that they are really, really committed to doing good work every single day. And then right there where the red arrow is, you will see committee documents. And so that's where you're going to click next in order to learn what are the rules of the committee. So, you've decided you want to submit testimony, you found out the committee, you know when the hearing is, but it's really important to know that every committee has rules and you have to follow the rules to a T in order to submit your testimony. There are deadlines, there's format issues. So you really have to make sure you're taking a good hard look at this next document. So, to find the rules, you're going to click on committee documents, and then I'm kind of skipping a step just for time. And then it's going to take you another page that says conferee rules. And so that's who you would be, a conferee, if you wanted to submit testimony. And that's where you would see the rules for the committee. So here's the document. You can see the deadline, how they want to receive the document. And then, so kind of starting at the top, you can see when the committee meets, you can see the email to the committee assistant. And then you will see how you can present your testimony. So in this committee, they want you to provide a digital copy of the testimony by email in PDF format to the committee assistant at least 24 hours in advance of the hearing. So if the hearing is scheduled for Monday, it's due 10:30 on Friday. And this committee, it's really nice. They also allow you to testify via WebEx. So that's like their version of Zoom, or if you want to do written only. It's really important to keep in mind that some committees actually require paper copies. I haven't worked with any committees this year that have done it, but there are almost 50 committees, like I said. So I'm not sure the rules of every single one, but for every committee, you have to click on their specific rules. Because if they require paper copies, then you probably need to get 20 or 25 copies to them by the deadline as well. I know that when we've had to submit paper copies to our committees, we've often served as a resource to concerned citizens who don't have the ability to get to Topeka by 10:30 a.m. on Friday to submit their testimony. So if that's one of the committee's rules that you're following, just find a partner to take them for you, because the more testimony in our book, the better. So everyone's going to want to work with you to make sure that happens. And kind of going back to the rules, the rules are pretty cut and dry, but you also need to double check the rules before you submit testimony. For example, in SCR 1611, the hearing's Tuesday morning at 10:30. So the testimony should have been submitted by Monday at 10:30. But because they're not in session on Friday or on Monday, we had to submit our testimony by 10:30 a.m. on Thursday. So just keep in mind that if you want to submit testimony, you might just want to reach out to the committee assistant to make sure that there are no changes to the rules. And also, sometimes committee meetings get scheduled kind of late, or hearing gets added to the books kind of late. And so sometimes you're scrambling. There have been instances when a committee meeting or a hearing was called less than 24 hours before the hearing. And so then we have to reach out to the committee assistant to see what the rules are for the testimony. So it is always good to double check because you want to make sure that your testimony is submitted. Okay, so you've decided you're going to submit testimony. And so there's some things that you need to prepare for. I think one of the first decisions that you're going to have to make is, are you going to do written or verbal testimony? Either method is effective, and I really just encourage folks to do the one that they're most comfortable with. Of course, with written testimony, you will not have to join the committee in person to testify. This is a really good option for people who are uncomfortable with public speaking or can't travel to Topeka, or your schedule doesn't allow you to be there during a committee hearing. Even if it is WebEx, if you have to work at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, that might preclude you from speaking. One of the downsides of not providing, but of only providing written testimony, is that you might miss out on the opportunity to talk to a legislator face to face. Committee meetings are just really insightful, and you can learn a lot more about elected officials and their positions. And so just hearing the things that they have to say about proposed legislation offers you a lot of insight into what they might be thinking. I remember a couple of years ago, I was in a committee meeting, and we had introduced a bill on repealing the lifetime ban for SNAP benefits for individuals with one or more drug felony. And a legislator in that committee meeting, he worked in law enforcement. He's, was from the county next to mine. He started to tell a story about being hungry as a child, and how he knows how hard it is for people in his own community to be able to thrive when they're hungry. We had never heard those words before from him. And so being able to be there as a participant in that committee meeting gave us a lot of insight. And we're actually able to work with that legislator the next session to reintroduce that bill again. So, being in the committee meeting can give you a lot of information, a lot of insight that then you can take with you and help you with your cause. If you decide to do verbal testimony, you should know that you will have about 2 to 3 minutes to present your testimony. You may have written 4 pages, but legislators tend to limit us on time, which is fair. I mean, they do try to get through a lot of bills at one time. They ask that you not read your testimony, but to just summarize it. So even if maybe you've written 3 pages of testimony, that would take about 10 to 15 minutes to read. One thing you might want to do is think about, writing a couple of paragraphs that you could read, but just don't read the entire testimony, because I know it can be kind of nerve-wracking. When you do appear in person, whether it's in the room or via WebEx, you should know legislators can ask you follow-up questions, which can seem really intimidating, right? But in all of the times that I've been in committee meetings, I have found legislators to be just mainly gracious with concerned citizens who are speaking. They might say there are tougher questions for lobbyists and other professional advocates, but by and large, they're really kind and compassionate to individuals who they know are doing this for the first time. And also, it's really important to know that if you've said that you're going to submit verbal testimony, you still have to submit written testimony. So you don't just get to show up the day of the hearing and read your testimony. You have to still go through the whole process of submitting your written testimony and then alerting the committee assistant that you're going to be doing it in person as well, whether it's in person or via WebEx. So you still have to do the written component. So writing compelling testimony. I think these are the basic 5 steps that you could do to write your testimony. I think it's a kind of a winning formula. Introduce yourself and sort of your connection to this cause. Tell your story. Why does this issue matter to you? What, who is this law going to impact? Why it's going to impact your life or a friend's life. Share why the bill matters to you. Urge them to oppose or support the bill. And in every piece of testimony, you do have to label it from the top. I urge you to support or not support the bill, and then thank them for their time. Testimony can be any length. Don't think that it has to be a 15-page, research item. Like I said up at the top, lived experience, it matters so much here. And those with lived experience are experts on the matter as well. So I want to give 2 examples of what testimony can look like. So this is the first one. This is an example of testimony from a concerned citizen. She wrote about their family's personal experience. And I just felt her testimony, which is about 2 pages, was really, really impactful. You're just basically writing a letter to the committee. One thing that you have to remember, though, is testimony is public and it will be uploaded to the legislature's website. And so you do need to be prepared for your name and your address to be shared alongside your testimony. So for the purposes of this presentation, I removed this conferee's address and email from it because I know that this video will go on YouTube later, and I didn't quite have her permission to share it, even though it is a public document. And then at Kansas Appleseed, this is what our testimony might look like. And I'm going to try to link this to sort of our longer testimony so you can see the difference. So as a public policy organization, we've done extensive research on all of the issues we advocate for. So when we submit testimony, we are weaving in a lot of data. I think this piece has about 10 citations because we want the data story to complement the lived experience story as well. And I would think it really shows that we need examples of both. For all of the issues before the legislature. So let's see if I can get this to click over to what our testimony will look like. So can you see the,
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So you can see what our testimony looks like. So I'm going to scroll down just a little bit. You can see we have all these citations. There's like numbers in every paragraph. So this is what we view our job at Kansas Appleseed, is to make sure that we are giving elected officials all the data they need to make the right decisions. Okay, so we're back on. So now what? You've testified, so you've gone to the hearing, you've testified, you've written your testimony, but don't stop being an advocate at that point. It's really important, especially if your own elected officials aren't in the committee, that you share your testimony with them and you urge them to vote yes or no if they should happen to see it. If you're going in person to the State House, reach out with your elected officials to talk about the issues that matter to them. And then as you watch the bill progress, advocate every step of the way, urge the governor to sign or veto a bill into law, show up at legislative coffees in district to hold your elected officials accountable. That is probably one of the most powerful things that you can do, is making sure your elected official knows that you're paying attention to their votes and that you're going to ask them questions about it when they show up home and are working with constituents. And of course, we can never end any presentation at Kansas Appleseed without recommending that, encouraging, like pleading with folks to vote. We are a nonpartisan organization, just like Women for Kansas. And it is really important that, we vote on the issues that matter to us, and not always get tied up in the names, but vote on the issues. Just one statistic that's going to be in our report next month when we release it is that Southeast Kansas has some of the highest food insecurity rates, has some of the highest low income rates, and some of the lowest voter participation numbers in the state. And we just really believe that if people vote on the issues, if they vote in their best interest, we'll see so much better outcomes for every single Kansan. And so the next part is I'm happy to take any questions. And I'm also going to just share my contact information right here. You can reach out to me anytime if you have questions. So I'm going to end the slideshow in just a second. So that way I can actually get back on the screen. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jamie. By the way, I was taking notes while Jamie was talking, so I love it. I was feverishly keeping up. Those were excellent examples. Especially thank you for showing us about the legislative calendar, right? We see phrases like turnaround, right, in headlines, but we don't always know what they mean. So thank you for explaining that and showing us especially how the legislature's website, which is really robust if you know how to use it, how much you can get from there. One question I wanted to ask you really quick, does it say then on the instructions? Oh yes, you submit your testimony if it's written or even if it's verbally in advance to the email address of the committee assistant, right?
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I had that in my notes. Okay, so some of the questions we're hearing, and again, anybody who's watching, if you see the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, feel free to put questions in there. So one of the questions we have is how often can someone submit testimony?
You can submit as much testimony as you want. Um, at Kansas Appleseed, we submit testimony, probably 30 times a year on the different bills. I mean, of course, you would only submit testimony, one time, per bill. But so let's say on 1611, the example. So right now that is in a Senate committee, so you submit testimony. But then when it goes to the House committee, you have to submit the testimony again. Like the testimony does not follow the bill, so you actually have to prepare to submit it twice.
Okay. So you're saying like the committee in each house would need to see new testimony.
Correct.
Okay. So testimony needs to be submitted for each house. Okay. Writing that one down. Okay. Okay, so you were saying that we needed to be mindful that if we're submitting testimony, this is part of the public record. It'll be on the legislator's website. And I was just telling Jamie, by the way, to our listeners before we got on, that I was looking at old testimony from like 2005 related to some research I was doing. So it's not just like it's on for this year, it's there for a while. So keep that in mind. Now, you also kindly showed us an example of your organization's letters and how they look and probably will look different. Are those letters also from organizations available online for us to see testimony submitted by organizations?
Yes, anyone who submits testimony, it is all public record. So it's actually kind of fun to read the details of maybe your opposition's testimony as well. It kind of gives you some insight into what they're thinking. But anyone who submits testimony, it is online, usually gets online, I would say 24 to 48 hours after a committee hearing.
Okay, okay. And another question we have is, are the committees efficient in getting their information up on the website? So, let's say you read an article about the legislative session today, and it talked about an issue and that it was going to committee. How quickly after that would it be updated on the website so you could see, when the hearing date is, know when you need to submit testimony?
Yeah, the committee agendas are usually published Thursday for the following week. So you should be able to see, if you're following something, you should be able to see when it is going to be on the calendar the previous week. Sometimes agendas aren't as robust as, we would like them to be. So sometimes it could be, committee meeting on call of the chair. So we don't fully know if there's going to be a meeting, nor do we know what they could be talking about if they have one. So you do have to sort of be hyper vigilant, especially if there's a bill that's really important to you. So agendas, I would say without a doubt, are posted on Thursday. They do get changed throughout the week as well. Committee testimony gets up, like I said, 24 to 48 hours. But the YouTube does live streaming as well, so you don't have to wait at all to see what happened in the committee meeting. You can watch it live, or you could go back and watch it a little bit later.
Okay, so is that on a Kansas Legislature like YouTube site?
Correct. Mhm.
Okay, okay. All right, so uh, do you ever have, or do you have experience with members of the committee officially responding to testimony, whether it be for an organization or for citizens?
They might ask you questions in a meeting. So that's one way to respond. I don't know if I've ever gotten we have gotten follow-up emails asking us to clarify a point as well. So sometimes they do actually.
Okay. If we see a committee agenda that's not accurate or we question it, what should we do? Who should we contact, or how can we make sure that the stuff we're seeing online is, as up to date as we hope?
Always contact the committee assistant.
Okay, committee assistant. Okay, cool. Um, okay, so uh, is there a phrase that a less bill? What is a less bill? Have you heard this phrase?
No.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's typed correctly. So Pam Martin, if you're listening, maybe give me some more explanation there. Okay, so I think another thing, this might be another point to highlight, is if you're following an issue, and like you're saying, the legislature moves quickly, you were mentioning that it's really important to follow if there are advocacy organizations related to your issue. So I did want to tell everybody that like Kansas Appleseed, for example, puts up a legislative weekly summary, right, on your website, on your blog. So uh, it might be worthwhile to follow somebody who's, engaged in similar issues to get that. I think the phrase is blessed bill.
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
I was thinking afterwards.
Okay, so what is that? Yeah.
Okay, so during the legislative process, um, we get to turn around. And so the first half of the session, the committees are meeting, they're hearing the bills, they're working the bills, so they're voting them and out of committee. Sometimes the calendar just does not work in their favor. It can be really intense for everyone. And so legislative leadership can do something called blessing a bill. And so what that means is they move it out of one committee and place it into another committee. It's called an exempt committee. So there are a few exempt committees that can hear new legislation at any point, new bills at any point during the session. But the leadership can say, you know what, I want this bill to go the distance. And so we're going to make sure it has a chance to either have a hearing, get worked on, or voted by a committee. So this year, I would say that there's probably about 30-ish bills that have been blessed, meaning even though they didn't make it past turnaround, they still remain active.
So just making sure I understood that. So a blessed bill moves between committees. Is that right? And
Correct.
And then it is still live, is what you're saying. It's not, because it moved between committees, it's as if it's not on the traditional clock, if you will.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. So after we submit let's say someone wants to do verbal testimony. They have submitted their written version at the appropriate time. Do they receive notice of when they would be presenting or when it's scheduled, or do they just use the date and time that was on like the website that you said?
It is all on you. So if you submit testimony and you are planning to do it live, you will need to show up the committee meeting at that time. And then they might change the hearing date. You just have to keep paying attention. It really is on you. If you decide that you are going to submit testimony via WebEx, so you're doing it online, the committee assistant will send you a link so you can log on at the appropriate time.
Yeah.
But so the impetus is just on you to be there in the right room at the right time.
Yeah. So I will say on the bill that you were demonstrating to us, right, it says on the website that Jamie was showing us, right, the hearing is Tuesday, February 25, 10:30 a.m., room 144S, right? So it does have that, which is pretty specific. But you would have to be, able to navigate the building, get there early enough to do all of those things. Okay. Okay, so and I really appreciated the graphic you showed us from Loud Light, right? How a bill becomes a law. But do you know if there's any other good like graphics or short explanations of the other things that happen, like the gut and go process? And can you explain that a little bit if people don't know what that means? And then is there other stuff about that?
Yeah, so the gut and go process, I just found it to be like incredibly crazy when I first heard about it, to be honest. So what can happen is, let's say that we're just make some stuff up because it's a little bit easier for me. So let's say there's Senate Bill 217, and it is all about cats. We're going to make sure cats have all the rights and liberties that they need to be successful. And so it passes out of the House, and everyone's excited because the bill passed out of the House because we love cats and we're going to support it. So the bill gets to the other chamber. And then all of a sudden, the other chamber is like, you know what? I think it should be about dogs. And so they can strip out all of the language about cats and put language in about dogs. And then they pass it, and then they just send it over to back to the other chamber for them to do an up down, do they agree with it or not bill and vote. So it's probably one of the most maddening things that I've ever seen, because you think that you are paying attention to a bill about cats, and you think it's great only to find out it's really about dogs. Those, so when that happens, all of a sudden it becomes like Senate sub bill number. So if you see like S sub or H sub before it, you know that that is something that they have gutted. It can be very, it just gets really complicated when you're trying to figure out where some legislation lives.
And the only way to end that process would be if the legislature passed legislation to no longer do that, right?
I think that would be correct. Yes.
Okay. So you were mentioning the blessed bills and you were saying that like, there were about 30-ish this year. Do you know if there's a place where you can see a list or are they designated in some way, online so that citizens could know that?
I know the Sunflower State Journal publishes what the blessed bills were. I just saw that yesterday morning. Kansas Appleseed, we published what, the bills that were blessed that we're working on. I assume like news sources are publishing them, but I've never really seen anything on the website that said these are the bills that are advancing. Now, if you actually go into a certain bill number, you might be able to see that a bill was either stricken from the calendar. If it was stricken from the calendar, that means it's like dead, it's not coming back. But if it was like reassigned to an exempt committee, you just have to kind of know some of the language. But I can look for the list of blessed bills and I can send it out to you, Ty, if you wanted to.
Yeah, great. And then Women for Kansas could share that too. I will say if Ty were looking for this, I'm a big fan of the Kansas State Library. So if you don't know, right, everyone, we have a Kansas State Library and it's in the Capitol and the staff there is really helpful in doing that. So before I've had a bill that I couldn't find that was in a previous legislative session, and I would just get on the Kansas State Library, which by the way, if you're looking for it, it's library.ks.gov. And they have you can submit questions on there. And I think if you do, yeah. So if you go to their website, they have a chat. And during business hours, it's staffed by a reference librarian. And you can also call them. So I have often used the Kansas State Library to help me either find that information or they help direct me to where. So like there was something that used to be on the state legislature's website that I couldn't find anymore. And so I went to the state library and they helped me find it. So I would encourage you to do that. There is also on the Women for Kansas website, the legislative hotline that you could call and they could also perhaps give you some guidance on that. Did you have any other things to add to those ideas?
Nope, these are really great ideas. And I'm already like posting the blessed bills into a Google Doc to share with you. So
okay, perfect. All right, well then we'll send that out, folks, after the meeting, so you can watch for that. Okay, so we're almost out of time. So do you have any? This seems like really daunting work. This seems like it's very like frantic, especially when we're in the session. So what advice would you give to citizens who want to get engaged that feel a little overwhelmed? Like how would you encourage them?
just start with a conversation with your elected official and let them know where you stand on something. I've talked to so many elected officials that said, if 5 people contact me about an issue, that's a lot in some weeks. And I'm like, but I've talked to 20 people who are outraged about this issue. So I think it's just really important to talk to them because we can never give elected officials a free pass. We can never, think that our voice won't matter because we have to make sure when they go in to vote, whether it's on something we support or we don't support, that they are voting against what we want sometimes. And we have to make sure that they know that, and we have to make sure that we hold them accountable for it.
That is a wonderful way to end. Thank you so much, Jamie. Well, we are also grateful for your work. Thank you for sharing this knowledge with us. We're going to work on collecting the slides too that Jamie shared with you so we can share those out. So watch on Women for Kansas socials or watch on our newsletter for Women for Kansas to get more information. And thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you, Jamie. We really appreciate you sharing this knowledge with us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye everyone. Happy Sunday.